everyone, today I'd like to take you through needle turn applique and show you some of the finer details and the way I like to do it. The needle turn applique is one of those things that people shy away from a little bit. They're a little bit afraid of it. However, it's not that hard, and if you learn how to do it properly, it's very simple. The first thing I always like to do with my beginner people is to start them on a heart shape. A heart shape is one of those things that if you work on a heart, it has all the things that you need to know about needle turn applique. It has the curved outside edges, it has your inverted point, it has a point at the bottom, and sometimes I have those little curved edges on the inside here. So if you learn on a heart shape, then basically you can do anything. You can do a Baltimore quilt, it's just more of it or smaller pieces, but all these techniques will put you in good stead for doing lots and lots of needle turn applique. So firstly, I'd like to talk to you about templates and things like that. I don't have a lot of things that I use with needle turn applique. I'm a pretty basic sewer as far as that's concerned. There's lots of things out there that you can purchase, but I think, you know, for me, as you've probably heard on a lot of videos that I've done, if I can get to my end result at a quicker pace, then that's the way I like it, but not to the detriment of my work. So if I can cut out some steps, then that's what I'm going to do. So you're going to need a template of some sort, whether it be a template that you've made from something, like I use a template paper, which is a heavy-duty tracing paper. I was from a drafting background originally, and this is what we used to use pre-computers, so it just makes a lot of sense to me. You can write on it, you can copy on it. It's very user-friendly, it doesn't wreck your scissors. Or you may pre-purchase some templates yourself, whether they be heart shapes or flowers or whatever. You can. There's a multitude of templates out there that you can buy for applique. So first of all, if you're going to make a template, you can take some of the template paper and you can trace your shape around the outside of it, and then we're just going to simply cut it out. And as I said before, this is pretty user-friendly, this paper. It doesn't ruin your scissors. It's easy to cut, and you can actually write on it, run it through your printer, and that's all you would do, is just simply cut it out like that. But as I said, we're going to work with a heart shape, so I've pre-cut out a heart. This is your template paper. It comes in your little A4 sheets like that in a packet of 3, and it's simply called template paper. I'm not sure what else you'd call it really. So I've actually cut out a heart before I started the video. And we're going to work with a sandpaper board. Now, a sandpaper board is one of those things that, you know, I've had one in my kit for a long, long time. I've been doing patchwork for 35 years now, and it's one of the original things that I ever had, and I use it a lot. So a sandpaper board is something that you put, when you put your fabric on and you're drawing on it, it stops your fabric from moving. So if you were to put your fabric on it and you want to draw on it, it doesn't move at all. But if you were to put it onto a surface, a normal surface, it will move around, and then you have a lot of trouble drawing on your fabric. I use a Soline pencil, whether it be a trio pencil or just a single Soline pencil. I like the ceramic lead in it. It's one of the best pencils on the market, I think. So all you're going to do is put your template on top of your fabric and trace around the outside. And there you have your heart shape drawn onto your fabric. Okay. Then you're going to take your sharp little embroidery scissors. I use the Karen K. Buckley ones with the pliable handles. I love her little scissors. And you're going to cut a seam allowance of less than 1/4 inch, about 3/16 is a good size. And I think sometimes that you need to have a little bit of faith when you're cutting the seam allowance. Some people like to always cut that big 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that's where you're going to come into a lot of trouble. If you cut your seam allowance too wide with your applique, it's difficult to manipulate the fabric going underneath. So if you can just have a little bit of faith, cut your seam allowance a little smaller, so you can see the line there, and you can see how small I've cut that seam allowance. Okay, so I've got one here that I've already prepared. So I've cut my heart shape out. Now I'm going to show you, I've actually done some drawing so I can show you what I'm going to do next. So what we're actually working on here is on-laid applique. On-laid applique is applique that is actually laid onto something else and then needle turned around the outside edge. Simply because if you do, you're going to get little points on your outside curve there. And the other reason that you would get points on that outside curve is if you had a seam allowance that was too wide. So it's really important to get that seam allowance back, trim it back. This is a very slight inward curve, but for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to show you what I do. You can clip into the inward curve, but you don't clip right to the drawn line. You are going to clip 2 threads away from the drawn line. And then when you turn your fabric under with your needle, then those last 2 threads that you haven't clipped into, they will just stretch in and sit beautifully around the outside edge of your heart. The inverted point at the top, you would clip 1 clip straight down, 1 thread past the drawn line, just 1 thread. Now just lash out there. I know that you're all going to be a bit nervous about doing that, but just cut 1 thread down. And then at the bottom here, we're going to leave that, and then I'm going to show you how to do those points. So it's not hard, it's just the more you practice, the better you get. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to take my background fabric and I fold it in half, and I fold it in half again, so we get our quarter marks on there, our center lines. I'm going to take my heart shape and I'm going to use some applique glue. Now applique glue, you can use pins if you want to, but applique glue I think works a whole lot better. If you're someone who's doing a lot of sewing, the worst thing that can happen is when you're sitting down in a comfortable chair at night and you've got all your pins in it, and next thing your pins are flicking on the floor, and I'm here to tell you, you're not the person that will stand on it. It will be somebody else and they'll hate you forever. So glue's great because I can prepare all my work, and when I'm traveling so much I can glue all my work down and then I can just pick it up and I can sew it. So when you're working with the glue, you've got to learn not to use too much. Some people use way too much glue. This is water-soluble glue, and so it will wash out. So on a heart shape, I'm just going to put some glue on here and show you how little I use. So on something that size, I would put 3 spots. And I know that's probably difficult for you to use, but I have a spot for you to see, sorry. A spot here, here, and here. And they're very small spots. And I'm going to place it over on my ironing surface. And I'm going to line my heart shape up on my background, and then I just press it. Now you can just not press it, you can just hold it there if you like. Okay, so there we have our heart shape, and it's all stuck onto our background piece. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a needle and a thread. Now the best thing for needle turn applique is, you know, if you have a nice fine needle. Now everybody knows that I use Milliner's 11 for just about everything I can get my hands on. I just love those needles. However, last year I sourced to have some new needles made for needle turn, and they're a size 15. They're a little longer than the 11 needle, and I know that some people love the length, and I certainly do, but I sourced out the 15, and they are a little longer. In fact, they're quite long, but they're very, very fine, and they're just beautiful to needle turn with. They are pliable in your hand, so you just need to be careful and relax when you sew, so you're not gripping it really tightly like you would with a very short needle. So I like these 15s. I love the 11s. The 11s I always still use those for my English paper piecing, but for needle turn I've fallen in love with these 15s. So give them a try and see how you like them. The thread I use, if you can use a cotton thread if you want. Now, because we've always been taught to use cotton thread with cotton fabric, and so if you were working with a cotton thread, you would have to match your thread exactly to the colour of what you are sewing onto your background. So I would have to match it exactly to the red. Now, if you can't match it exactly, you need to go one shade darker. Never go lighter, always go darker. That's if you're using cotton thread. Now, with the bottom line thread, I use that for English paper piecings, but I really love it for applique as well. It's very fine and it blends into your fabric, so you don't have to colour match quite so much. So if I was working with the red, then I would use a red thread. I wouldn't use a white thread. but there's many colours that will blend, like our champagne 650 and our khaki colour, which is 617, and that will blend a lot with your all your different shades of fabric. Recently I was lucky enough, I'm pretty excited about this, that Superior Bottom Line actually have put my name to a selection of threads, a selection of my favourite coloured threads. So you can purchase a pack of 12 of my favourite threads, the threads that I use most of the time. But you have your neutrals and your red, and you've got a black and a white. So basically you can probably get away with using those colours most of the time. Okay, so here we have, let's put one over there, this one's nicely pressed. So I'm going to take my scissors before I start stitching, and I'm going to do what I said when I showed you the drawing. I'm going to clip one clip down into that inverted point, and I'm going to clip just around this outside edge, about 2 threads away from the drawn line. Now just a little hint when you're doing heart shapes. So if you're going to work with a lot of hearts, I would be inclined to put my heart shape on my template and run it up and down on the straight of the grain of the fabric, because when you're coming around here and you're going to stitch into this inverted point here, it's really good if you cut this on the straight of the grain. When you're clipping down in between the threads, you're not cutting across the threads on the bias. If you have something like a flower shape like I showed you here, then it's a little bit more difficult. You can't line up your straight of grain. But definitely if you're working with a heart shape or anything that has an inverted point going that way, try and keep that on the straight of grain, and I'll show you that when I show you how to sew it together. Okay, so I've clipped all of those where I need to. You can see just around the edge there I've clipped in one thread past that drawn line, and now I'm going to start to sew. Now with a heart shape we've got a point down here, so I would generally start and I would try and get that point fixed first, because sometimes when you start around here and by the time you get around here it's moved a little bit in your hand and you end up with a point heading in the direction you don't want it to go. So I always try and anchor my little point down first. So that's where I'm going to start. Now I guess that one of the main things that I find is that when people say to me, I hate doing needle turn applique, I hate doing needle turn applique, and often I find it's because they've worked in the wrong direction. They're stitching in the wrong direction. So if you're right-handed, you would work from right to left across the top of your work going that way. That's the top of your work, so you would work right to left going across the top of your work. If you were left-handed, you would come in the opposite direction. You would go left to right. Because when you come around to this point here and you're working that way, it is so much easier to manipulate that point. If you're working from left to right, you've got to come around here and you're working back this way and you're trying to work against yourself, and it's really difficult. So if you work from right to left, you'll get nice sharp points right here at the point of your heart. So I've taken a needle and thread, I've threaded it up and I've put a knot in the end. And I'm going to come up just inside my drawn line here, just underneath the red. You can't come up through the back, otherwise you won't be able to turn your thread under. Now this is needle turn applique, so you're making your needle work for you. You haven't got toothpicks, you haven't got scissors, don't get your fingers in underneath. It's needle turn. You turn it with your needle. The longer your needle, the easier it is to do. So you're just going to get your thumb right up nice and tight to the edge there, and you're going to turn it with the edge of your needle, not with the point of your needle. All right. Okay, get your thumb right up close and tight there. You're going to take your needle and you're going to go straight down next to where the thread came out of the red. You're going straight down just into the cream fabric. You're going to come up on an angle, just grab a little bite of fabric, and go down again. I always lean back on my red a little bit, and that way what happens is when you're going straight down and you're leaning back a little bit, your needle will go in under and then come up on an angle that way. And that way you're less likely to see any of your stitches around the outside edge. So working, see how I work with the edge of my needle? I don't poke at it. If you poke at it with the point, all that's going to do is fray the fabric in underneath. So straight down, lean back a little bit, up on an angle. Until we get up close to the point. Now I'm going to come up right at the very point. That's going to be my last stitch there. My stitches are about 1/8 of an inch apart, so 8 stitches to the inch. Now I'm going to do one little stitch right at that very point there. That's just going to lock it off while I play around with this point here. So sometimes your little tail is going to stick right out from the side there, sometimes it's not going to, sometimes it just sits in evenly. I'm just going to take a little smidge of that away from behind and just trim that little very bit off the end. And I know I'm not trimming much away, but when you're trying to push all of that into there, believe me, it's a lot. Okay, so I'm going to pull my thread out. I'm going to take my needle, I'm going to turn it under. See how I'm working with the edge of my needle? And you pull that thread out, and then I'm going to take another stitch right at the point and then come down the side. If you're trying to jam lots of fabric into that point, believe me, it will escape at some point. It will try and get out of there. Just come up the edge. See where my thumb is? It's right up close, holding my seam allowance under. Okay, and this is where we have a really sharp point. No lumps in behind it, it's nice and sharp. If you've got a red thread at the end, working with a red thread, then the point looks even sharper. Okay, and then you're going to travel all the way up around the outside edge. I'll see if I can do this a little bit quickly so I can get up to the curved bit. Now as you're sewing with this, if you have any little points, if you happen to have any little points on your edges, then what you need to do is just, so if you ended up with a little point on here, just take your needle, pull your seam allowance back out and realign it, because no amount of stitching is going to keep that or fix that point. It's a little point and it's going to be there to stay. There's no poke in it. Putting extra stitches in it is not going to help. So as you can see, I'm just coming up. And don't travel too far ahead of yourself trying to turn that seam allowance over. And so all my stitches have gone in underneath. You can't see any stitches along that edge now. So as I get up to the curved part, I keep my thumb right up close. Little by little. If you start turning too much at the one time, you end up with all your little points, and that's why it's easier just to turn it with your needle as you go along rather than turn it all over at once. You will always get little points no matter how careful you are. You always end up with these little points, and you've got to straighten them out anyway, so you may as well just turn it as you go. See how nice and smooth that is? And because of the curve of your thumb, the curve of the heart, your thumb just sits in right up nice and tight next to that edge of your work. See how smooth that is going around there? Okay, I'm going to take another needle. I'm just going to pop that in there. And I'm going to come up and just show you this little inverted point here. So I'm going to start again here. Why I start down here is I always try and start on the straightest edge that I can, but sometimes you're working with a circle, so that's a bit of bad luck. You just have to start wherever. So on this curve is like working on a circle, so I'm going to start just here, just so I can show you how I deal with those inverted points. So I've got my thumb right up close to my work again, going down, leaning back on my red and coming up on an angle. And little by little, just turn him in, get your needle under there, up on the edge, Sometimes when your thread matches your fabric so well, it's hard to see where it is. So I'm going to come right into that, where that clip is, where I've clipped it, and I take a bigger bite of fabric here. It's really difficult to see with the thread that I'm using, but I take a little bit bigger bite of fabric and I'm going to sew a couple of stitches right on top of each other, just a bit like a satin stitch, I guess, straight up and down right in that point. Now when you go and look at all these beautiful quilts that hang in these quilt exhibitions, you get up real close to those quilts and have a look, and you'll see that's exactly what they do, because we've actually got nothing there, we've clipped right into it. And you know, before I said about clipping straight down, see how all my threads are standing all straight up? If I'd have clipped that on an angle on the bias, I'd have had all little frayed bits there. So now all I'm going to do is take my needle, oops, got to get my thumb up close to hold it in under, and then I scoop my needle in around to get all those little tails in, and then I'm going to come back up my last stitch where over the top of my last two that I did right at the inverted point there, and then come up the other side. And again, really just turning little by little. Okay, so there we have a nice sharp point here and a nice point, inverted point at the top. And coming up around here, I'll just go back to this needle, and some nice, really smooth curved edges. But think about how you sew. If you're an appliquer and you're not loving it, think about what direction you're sewing in. And if you're sewing in the other direction, turn it around and see if this makes any difference. So see, coming around the curve there, it's not so hard. If you had a big wide seam allowance there, it would be difficult because it would all pleat up. This way it comes around, it's nice and smooth. No bumps, no lumps. I've got one stray thread there. Okay, nice and smooth. See how the curve is really smooth? Points, points. Perfect. Okay, so that's how you'll do on lathe needle turn applique. Now what I'm going to show you next is some reverse applique.